going to trust that God has a word for us today. I feel, if I'm honest, I feel slightly unsettled, and also I feel fired up to honor the work of the Holy Spirit. So I'm gonna lead this morning and trust that God will be glorified. So I want to start this morning with a story. So before my senior year of college, I came to Fresno for a summer internship. I was a student at UNLV in Las Vegas, where I grew up, and I didn't know very much about Fresno. I didn't know 10 years later I'd be living here. But I knew that there was a ministry at UNLV that I was involved with that had a program where you could come to Fresno, live downtown, learn about God's heart for justice and reconciliation, and live and serve locally in organizations ministering. And so I said yes, and I signed up. I was placed with Habitat for Humanity, and I thought, okay, God, put me where you need me. Is it going to be building homes? Is it going to be recruiting families? I was so eager to serve. And little did I know that changing the world would look like doing office work all summer. I did a lot of organizing and filing, and I'm a people person, and that was really hard. It was definitely not what I expected, but it ended up being the necessary work that freed up the full-time Habitat ministry leaders, the ones with contract experience who could lead the building projects, the ones with relational trust who could reach families that were in need. And I had to do some honest reflection about my own ideas of what it meant to serve. As I thought about my experience that summer, I had to really wrestle with my desire to feel important. And it was a humbling summer where God gently taught me that I am not at the center of the kingdom of God. Well, this morning, as we continue this series in the Beatitudes, we are going to continue to get a glimpse of this kingdom that Jesus says is both at hand, is the kingdom of the now and not yet, where the last are first, where the sick are healed, where the lowly are lifted up, which sounds really impressive until you realize that this upside down nature of the kingdom means that one of the most robust teachings that Jesus gave was not given in a temple. It was given on a mountainside among some of society's most marginalized people, and not with the religious elite. So we're going to continue this morning and unpack the Beatitudes that we've been walking through week after week. And we're going to look at the third Beatitude today, blessed are the meek. But I'm going to begin by reading the whole passage because it's part of a whole. So I'm reading here now in Matthew 5, 1 through 12. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Meekness is not a very common word in our language. In fact, what comes to mind for you when you think of the word meek? For me, it's someone who's quiet, reserved, maybe even gutless or spineless. Some modern definitions carry this sentiment. They describe meekness as quiet, gentle, submissive, easily imposed upon. The character to think of is in that description is Toby from The Office, Toby Flenderson, someone who's just really, really submissive. But this doesn't fully capture the Greek word used in this verse, praus. Yes, it includes mild and gentle and kind, but it's more than that. The word described here is described as having the necessary power, the necessary balance of exercising power and avoiding harshness. The necessary balance of exercising power and avoiding harshness. New Testament scholar William Barclay says, it's a word that's used to describe a wild stallion that has learned how to channel its strength with the help of a bit and bridle. So biblically speaking, meekness suggests great strength under great control. That's not Toby. The character that comes to mind, I think of like Clark Kent, the superhero. He's someone who has the skills and strength of Superman, but wields those powers for the good of others. If we keep turning a few more chapters in Matthew 11, Jesus describes himself as meek. In this familiar verse for some, it says, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for I am gentle." And that's that same meek, the word, meek, praus. "For I am meek and humble in heart. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Meekness and humility have an interdependent relationship. It's hard to put meekness on your to-do list, like I'm going to be meek today. But rather, meekness is the fruit of a life of practiced humility. I love the way that C.S. Lewis describes humility. It's not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less, or not at all. In other words, humility is not putting yourself in the center of every story or every experience. I think this is really hard to do because so many things in our culture seek to do that, frame our experience as central. It's what drives advertising, it's what drives the entertainment industry, and even which history lessons are taught in school. It takes intentionality to pursue meekness. A few years ago, on the heels of a presidential election, there were, all the presidential debates. And I read this article that really stayed with me. It was written by a former university staff, Nikki Toyoma-Setsuko, and she works with IJM, International Justice Mission now. And she wrote an article that really helped me grasp this intentionality. As she watched the debate, she decided that anytime a candidate talked about a people group, she would add the phrase, "who is made in the image of God." So if a candidate said, "my policies will make sure that refugees," she just inserted refugees who are made in the image of God. And she explained this. She said, "I know that I have a tendency to demonize the other. And this exercise helps remind me that each person is valuable in God's eyes." And I appreciate how this intentional act helps decenter her own experience and add value to the experiences of others. That's meekness. Imagine the impact that our relationships have when we make it a practice to put the needs of others before our own. Now remember, meekness is not passiveness. It's great strength under great control. Meekness doesn't avoid hard conversations or speaking out against wrongs, but rather it does so from a place of humility, avoiding harshness. Remember, Jesus, who embodied meekness, said he came to preach the good news to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to free the oppressed, Luke 4. Jesus treated those who were marginalized and suffering and outcast with dignity. He confronted racial hostility by intentionally going into Samaria. And despite crowds calling for his attentions, he stopped and looked at the bleeding woman in the eye and said, "Tell me more," and listened to her whole story of pain and suffering. In fact, where Jesus reserves his harshness is with the religious leaders who could not see how their practice of religion was missing the heart of God's love for people. He called the Pharisees a brood of vipers. He turned over money changer tables for their exploitation of the poor. Meekness is great strength under great control. So how can we do likewise? I think there are a couple of barriers that can keep us from being like this, from being meek. Both center our experience above others, and both, I think, require intentional self-reflective work to change. The first is defensiveness. When we get defensive, we can't hear what another person is saying. We can't imagine someone's experience or perspective as being different than our own. Or we assume someone's experience is the same as ours. My family and I love hosting people. It's one of the things we've missed the most in this quarantine. But often, like, we love to invite people over, and usually it means I turn into this crazy person that's like obsessively cleaning every corner of the house. And this can totally stress me out. And it feels impossible with kids. I usually end up taking it out on my husband, who, when he gently tries to like ask how I'm doing, I'm like, fine, I'm fine. Or he'll ask me like, do you need any help? And I'm, no. I get really like, this needs to happen. And I double down on like my need for perfection. And I think if I really slowed down, try and figure out what was going on internally, I would see that it's less about our friends expecting like this amazing Martha Stewart home. And it's more that I have this need in me to be validated as this great host, as a good mom, as someone with a creative house. It's about me. Defensiveness keeps us from doing the hard work of inner reflection. I do this with my kids. I get frustrated with my kids and I say, you're not listening to directions. When I realize, actually, I'm not helping them listen. Or I think in Fresno, we do this when we say like, it's just hot. We kind of justify and defend our terrible behavior or irritations with each other. It really is just hot. So sometimes I do think that is, but I think we're really good at being defensive. Right now, I see this in our culture. I think right now we can see this around conversations about race. Rather than seek to understand another person's experience, we respond defensively. We make assumptions or we fail to ask questions. One way I see this happening a lot right now is around the statement, Black Lives Matter. For some, can't understand why this has become a rallying cry for the Black community. They can't understand how Black people's experiences are different from their own, or how the Black community has felt overlooked or their lives in danger. Meekness is asking those questions and genuinely seeking to understand, to learn, to listen. Defensiveness is closing our ears and our hearts to the conversation. One way I see this is when someone, responds to the phrase Black Lives Matter with All Lives Matter. It's not that it's not true in a literal sense, but often the phrase is used to diminish and dismiss another person's experience or to end a conversation rather than open up dialogue. Meekness seeks to understand, to hear the whole story. I just want to pause for a second, even as I give some of these examples. I just want to ask, where does that land for you? Where in your life do you feel yourself get defensive? What would it look like to step out of that intentionally and give yourself space to seek another way? Another barrier to practicing meekness in our relationships is fear and shame. When we become so terrified of saying the wrong thing or fear the implications of calling out hurtful behavior or attitudes, we prioritize our comfort over other people's suffering. Meekness chooses vulnerability. What would it look like to press into meekness and not lean into defensiveness, fear, or shame? What impact would that have on your relationships? When I graduated college, I came on staff with InterVarsity, the campus group that I was involved in at UNLV. And as a student, I was one of about 100 students. There were only about 4 of us that weren't white. And as God did this transforming work in the hearts of our staff team and the leadership team, we gained a growing holy discontent around this. We had this, our hope was to see our group reflect the ethnic diversity of our campus, which was about 50% not white. And as much as we learned and we prayed and we listened, we realized there were some practical barriers that were keeping students of color, mostly Black and Latino students, from participating in our programs that mostly occurred on a Friday night. And for a lot of them, conflicted with family obligations that they had. And the thing is, it feels like an easy fix, change the night. But InterVarsity at UNLV had always met on a Friday night for years, for decades. And changing that felt really uncomfortable. And it was hard to let go, but not changing it felt way too costly. And so we did. We changed the night that we met as a group to Thursday nights. And we were able over time to see God answer our prayer. Our group became more diverse. But even beyond that, as students of color were able to participate in our programs, as they were able to meet Jesus, get discipled, become leaders, they were able to be part of this leadership team and later the staff team that helped shape the entire ministry. God transformed our hearts in the process, and we were better because of who was now able to be in the room. There's this powerful passage that shaped our decisions in Acts 6, where the number of people that were following Jesus was growing. And it meant that there was this new and diverse community sharing life together and growing in faith together. But there was a problem. In Acts 6:1, it says that the Hellenistic Jews, or these were the Greek Jews, or the Jews that had adopted like Greek language and culture, the Greek Jews complained that the Hebraic Jews, because their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. So though they were all followers of Jesus, their cultural bias towards one another was affecting their actions. And so those who were overlooked voiced their complaints, and the result was an act of cultural humility. A new leadership team was formed, comprised of both Hellenistic and Hebraic Jews. They could have listened to the complaint and said, "Ooh, sorry, we'll try better. This is not who we are." But instead, they listened, they learned, and they responded by making changes that would better ensure that things would be more just. When we put the welfare of others above our own, we enable ourselves to see others as Jesus sees them. And this is important personally, interpersonally, but it's also important culturally and systemically. Meekness says that regardless of intent, if the impact is harmful, I care. Meekness is disrupting your own agenda to serve others. It's decentering ourselves in order to center the needs of others. Cultural humility is recognizing that the culture we come from, the culture you come from, is one of many. And there are so many different experiences out there. It's not assuming everyone's experience is like yours and not centering your experience or perspective as the norm. What would it look like to seek to understand a culture or people group that's not like yours, and to do so from a place of humility? And also, what would it look like to learn more about your own culture or people group? In the book, The Color of Compromise, Jamar Tisby, the author, he says, a great starting point for every American is to learn the racial history of the United States. And there are so many good books right now being elevated on this. I'm currently reading the book, The Myth of Equality, Uncovering the Roots of Injustice and Privilege. But it's important that we hear the whole story, that we seek to understand. And rather than being silent, terrified of saying the wrong thing, or being defensive, what would it look like to be meek and humble in that pursuit? So why do the meek inherit the earth? What does earth as your inheritance look like? Well, in Psalm 37, we see an imprint of verse 5 of this beatitude. In Psalm 37, it says, "But the meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in an abundance of peace. And in a similar way that Ryan began this series by saying our spiritual poverty is an invitation to spiritual riches, I think here in this passage, in this beatitude, I think we see that our relational humility is an invitation to our relational healing. Let me say that again. Relational humility is an invitation to relational healing. We were all made to flourish, and yet we live in a world marred by brokenness and injustice. And God sees those who are on the margins, those who are being oppressed, those who are hurting. And he says, it is not right. You were made to flourish. And Jesus, with strength and conviction, was intentional about crossing barriers, crossing cultural barriers, lifting up those who society dismissed. And the ultimate act of meekness experienced death on the cross. What would it look like for you to live a life that seeks to help others flourish and to break the barriers that keep that from happening? What's a relationship in your life that God might be inviting you to see with new eyes? Maybe that's a neighbor that's different from you, or a coworker who's off-color jokes just great at you. Maybe it's a family member that you just struggle to extend compassion towards, or maybe it's broader. Maybe it's being intentional about seeking to understand the experience of a people group, or learning the racial history of our country. But what is something that God might be inviting you to see with new eyes? And what gets in the way from you experiencing peace in that relationship? How might God be inviting you today to consider how you can approach that with humility and weakness? Let me close in prayer. Jesus, we come together under your great name. We open our hearts, open our ears, and seek you to speak and lead. God, would you teach us what it means to be meek? Would you give us opportunities to decenter ourselves so that we can care about the needs of others, and by doing so, lift up your name? Would we be people who who live out the gospel both in word and deed, God? And would you grow our capacity for discomfort? Would you expand our hearts to embrace those that we have a resistance towards? Would you help us find ways, even this week, that we can experience relational healing by seeking to humble ourselves and to embrace the other with compassion and with meekness? And would you transform us, Lord, as we seek to follow you? And we pray in Jesus' name, amen.